Shalom, everybody. This is Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Stephen with you with this week's 10-minute Torah. So we've a little bit beyond our high holidays. Hope you're doing well with that. And when I say that, here's kind of an interesting question. How is everybody coming with their New Year's resolutions? I know that's kind of an interesting question, because what are we doing during the high holidays? We start with Rosh Hashanah and we're asking God to inscribe us in the book of life. And, we're looking at all the sins that we could have done. Maybe there are sins there that we've done we don't want to acknowledge, or we don't acknowledge, or we didn't realize, or one of those things. Then we take 10 days where we really dig deep and we look at our behavior and think about who we are and what we want out of this next coming year in 5783. And then, of course, Yom Kippur is sort of the peak of that, when we ask to be inscribed in the book of life. And then in the afternoon, we ask to be sealed in the book of life. And we move on to another year, older, wiser, looking to better ourselves. So, what is it that causes sin? What is it that makes a person righteous? Sometimes, we look at life and it's not exactly the way we want it to be. Things aren't exactly happening the way we want it to. And sometimes, we put in the effort and it gets frustrating because we don't see the results that we want. So that sometimes tempts people to take shortcuts in morality and their values. And that's really the issue. When we talk about a New Year's resolution, how about this for a New Year's resolution? How about respecting ourselves more and being our own reinforcement? Now, those of you that know me well know that I've got a background in mental health, and my big shtick, if you will, is self-esteem. It's how do we feel about ourselves? Can we, like Rudyard Kipling, remember that poem? If you could keep your head while all those around you are losing theirs. If you can really respect yourself when maybe the tide is turning and maybe other people don't, or maybe the crowd is doing something different, that's really what integrity is all about. Now, let's use that as a lead into this week's portion, Chayei Sara, the life of Sarah. So the portion opens up, and this is sort of the focus of our triennial year, our first part, triennial year one. And Abraham is going off, and he's looking for a burial site, a sepulcher, if you will, the cave of Machpelah, that he wants to inter his beloved wife Sarah. And he goes to the Hittites, this one character, Ephron, who apparently is the head honcho there. And he wants to buy the cave, and Ephron at first is like, well, what is agreement among friends? You can have the cave. And Abraham's like, no, I insist, I'll pay for it. And one of the things we see, especially later on, when after Jacob and Esau have had their falling out, and Jacob is leaving, the house, the pasture, if you will, the property of Laban, the employee of Laban, and he meets up with Esau again, and Jacob has all these gifts that he's going to offer Esau, and Esau's like, no, I've got enough, and Jacob's like, well, I insist, and Esau is like, okay, well, if you insist. And that apparently was the way they accept things in the Middle East. They first make this appearance of humility, and then, well, okay, if you insist. So Ephron says, what is 400 shekels among friends? And apparently each shekel, according to the Art Scroll commentary, was something in the neighborhood. Anyway, he ended up paying him almost $2 million, or 2 million shekels, I'm sorry. So one shekel was like 2,500 regular shekels or something like that. So it was an exorbitant amount. But Abraham just went ahead and he just paid it. He didn't care. He wanted his beloved wife, Sarah, to have a burial site that was fitting for her righteousness and her integrity. Now, we know that the practice of naming parshas is after a specific word or term, as in this case, in either the first or second verse of the parsha. And that practice was repeated in the Talmud. So for the first book of the Torah, which we're studying now, Genesis. Um, Bereshit, that's the Hebrew name for Genesis in the beginning, is not only the beginning of the book, Bereshit, bara Elohim, in the beginning, God created, or the Lord created, depending on how you interpret Elohim. And it's also the name of the first Parsha. Then the next Parsha is Noah, Vayomer Adonai Noah, Noah is the person that it's focusing on, and his name is up there in one of the first verses. So if you notice, the first portion, Bereshit, was about Bereshit. It was in the beginning, and it took us through the whole creation. The second Parsha, Noah, was all about this guy, Noah, that God came to and said, you're righteous in your generation, and the rest of humanity is wicked. I'm going to destroy them. I'm going to make you a new nation. The next portion, Lech Lecha, was about Abraham, Lech Lecha, going for himself and leaving his home and going to a new place spiritually and physically. Then we have the Era, where Moses sees the three visitors, travelers who were angels disguised as humans, and now we have Chayei Sara. And the only reference to Sarah in this portion really is she died at the age of 127. She was 7 years and 20 and 100. And each one of those phrases of her years had a specific connotation. She was as innocent and youthful as as innocent, as beautiful as a 7-year-old. She was as beautiful as a 20-year-old, and she was as wise as someone who's 100. Like that. And that's it. So what I'm getting at is there more to the life of Sarah than just the one verse or the two verses? And the fact that, now that Sarah's lived, now that she's died, we have to go find, we have to make arrangements for her to be interred, respectfully. Let's examine this. Let's look at this a little bit. Abraham, after he lays Sarah to rest, he goes off and now he sets in motion with his head of household. And that head of household is never named. We take it for granted that it's Eliezer because a few chapters ago, a few portions ago, Eliezer was mentioned as his chief of staff, the head of his household. And we don't really hear his name again, especially in this parsha. When he goes off back to Abraham's ancestral land to find a suitable mate for his son Isaac, then we don't hear his name. He's just referred to as Abraham's manservant. But here's where I think the idea of Sarah's life comes into play. Sarah was as great as Abraham. Let's face it, without the matriarchs, there'd be no patriarchs, right? And the matriarchs were busy supporting the patriarchs in their quest to bring monotheism to the world. And they were righteous in their own right, weren't they? So it's not just the life of Sarah. Let's look at this as Sarah's influence. Her influence on Abraham to find someone like her that will continue this new tradition that the two of them have started with their son, Isaac. So Isaac needs to have a wife that is as close to Sarah as possible. Sorry for my breathing. That's kind of the way I breathe sometimes, taking large breaths. So, the elephant in the room, if you will. So we see Sarah's profound influence on generations to come, don't we? And what happens when Eliezer meets who is in effect Sarah's successor, which is Rebecca? She's at the well. She is hospitable to Eliezer. She offers to water the camels. She brings him home to meet the family and to give him quarters. So she shows the same generous hospitality that Sarah did as the hostess. Remember when the three visitors came? So she has that integrity. So the life of Sarah is really kind of a beginning of its own. It kind of shows us how the woman now are going to behave. The men, of course, are taking after Abraham, being hospitable, kind to strangers, righteous, wanting to do the right thing. And Sarah is the feminine part of that, the one that prepares the home, takes care of the kids, all right, imbues in them the same integrity that Abraham had, and thus is continuing that tradition. So consider that as we go through this portion. Looking forward to seeing you all in services. And other than that, hope you're doing well. Hope we're still keeping the idea of the high holidays within us. We've had 3 weeks of it, so it's meant we do that to really kind of hone in on the fact that we always want to be better people. We always want to have integrity. We always want to love justice. We'll love mercy, do justice, and walk humbly with Hashem. Shabbat shalom.